Okay, it is January 8th, 2011, and we're going to do some recording. We're going to go back in time and start really at the beginning of the memories of Mom and Dad, even Ernie, and see how far we get and where we wander. So it's pretty exciting. So what I thought we'd start with is your earliest memories of Germany, what it was like to grow up as children in the 30s, in the early 30s in Germany, and then we'll move on to America and everywhere else. Either of you have beginnings? I know that you've told some stories in the past. We've heard some nursery rhymes. Love to hear Hoppe Hoppe Rider if you still remember it.
Really?
Because
Nice.
I would like to have it recorded because I'd like to learn it sometime.
Okay.
We were just talking before about the streetcar, and as a 5 or 6 year old you were allowed to ride, which sort of just makes us overprotective people of the 21st century gasp. So any of those stories would be great. So either of you want to begin?
Well, I remember very few things from my early childhood. I remember the house in which I was born. Of course, not the day I was born, but when I was a small child there, I remember riding a tricycle in the courtyard behind the house, which also contained a wine tasting facility where my grandfather and his cohorts tasted wine all day, every day, as far as I knew. And you probably know the ritual involved with that.
Drinking and spitting?
And drinking and spitting and having bread, I think, in between and so on. And the only other memories I have of that are the neighbors who had rabbits, and we were allowed to bring them stale lettuce leaves.
Rabbits next door?
Sandbox on the house, and I do know that Ernie's parents, your grandparents, took a picture of that house when they were on a visit, and when your dad and I went back many years later, long after we lived in this country, I was able to recognize the house. I didn't know the address, but I recognized it from their picture. And these memories came back to me at that time. The only other, I have very few memories of my childhood. The only other things I remember were not so happy ones. We were sent to Belgium, my brother and I, to a town called Heist. My parents had a mistaken impression that the seashore was so good for children that it didn't much matter that that the children were separated from the parents at a much too tender an age. And the people who cared for us, they ran some kind of summer camp, but they were really kind of sadists.
And you were about 3 and 6 at the time, right?
Right, I was 3, I think, the first time, and I won't go into the details of what I remember, but it was not too happy, and my brother's memories are worse. And we were sent there again. Peter thinks it was only for a few months when my parents were trying to negotiate a way out of Germany. I thought it was another whole year. The first time was just a summer. Second time I thought it was a year. We were smuggled out of Germany, dressed as if we were going to school with no luggage, in order not to be stopped, and that was successful. We did live in the same place for whatever length of time it was. And my family came to this country on a ship called the USS Penland. And that was a very unpleasant trip. Most of us were seasick for most of the journey, which was much longer than it should have been because of the mines in the ocean.
When was it?
It was in 1938. We went from Rotterdam to the States. We had to spend the preceding year in Rotterdam awaiting.
You spent a whole year there?
We spent almost a full year there awaiting a quota number, which allowed us to go to the United States. And as you are probably aware, the only way you could emigrate to the United States in the 30s was to have affidavits from usually relatives who would vouchsafe that you would not be a burden on the state and that you would be the breadwinner, would have a job, etc. And that, of course, happened because my mother's brothers had emigrated in the early 30s and had guaranteed my father a job in the same business. the wine business that they were in.
Was that the Frums?
That was Paul Frum in Chicago, one of the Frums.
Uh-huh.
And then we arrived in New York and then went directly to Chicago, which is where we was our home for the next 10 years or so. I started in the first grade, although I was 8 years old, because I had never been to school. And as soon as I learned English, which seemed almost overnight, it was actually probably 6 weeks before I became fluent enough.
That's amazing.
To learn something. And then by the end of the year, I was in the third grade where I belonged.
So you didn't have any schooling at all in Rotterdam or in Germany?
None at all. I don't know why. I don't know why my parents didn't teach me to read and write German.
Uh-huh.
I think nowadays people think that's useful. Even learning a language that you will not be using immediately.
Uh-huh.
But in any case, I continued to speak German. My mother had imported a young woman to live with us in Germany for a year. My mother desperately wanted to emigrate to the U.S., so she planned for it and imported a young woman from Dublin to live with us. And she learned English that way, so my mother learned English with an Irish accent.
Oh, how fun.
With an overlay of German accent, I assume. I don't know what that sounded like. My father was less of a student and didn't pay too much attention. My brother and I paid no attention whatsoever, and I don't think we learned a word of English till we landed in the U.S.
Did you learn Dutch when you were in Holland?
I did not learn Dutch. My brother thinks he did, and Flemish in Belgium. I was quite fluent in French as a small child, but lost all that facility and had to relearn it in college. Took it very intensively in college, double units, and was good at it. Lived in French house, spoke French in the house in which we lived. That was required, and at dinner. All gone. I can't see a French movie without seeing the subtitles today because I didn't practice it. So let that be a lesson to you.
Well, I'm not good at languages to begin with, but I'm just in awe.
If you wish to retain a language, you need to practice it.
Uh-huh.
And that's all I remember from
Now, your mom
Germany.
really supported you guys when you got to Chicago, right?
She did. Her first job was as a babysitter for 25 cents an hour. And as soon as her English was a little more fluent, she doubled her salary, went to work at Carson Peary Scott, a department store, and sold belts and accessories. Made 50 cents an hour. And in due course, her sister-in-law, Erica Frum, Paul's wife, told her to apply for a job as a librarian at the University of Chicago. My mother was somewhat aghast at this suggestion, insofar as she had never gone to college, much less library school. She had what I think was called finishing school for about a year in Germany, but there was a war on. There was a terrible labor shortage. Erica suggested that my mother tell of the lie that her college degree was lost in the war, and not to mention anything about a library degree because that was going a bit far. My mother was duly hired, did extremely well, and came to be the third highest ranking librarian in the whole University of Chicago library system.
I had no idea. How long were you guys in Chicago?
When I was 8 years old until I graduated from high school at 17 and a half.
So essentially 10 years.
10 years.
And she was probably at the library for 8 or 9 of those?
I don't know when she took the job.
Because she didn't continue when you went to California.
No, unfortunately, the climate in Chicago didn't agree with my mother at all. She had a nervous condition that caused her to break out in a rash, and we had very limited air conditioning very late in our life in Chicago. And so the climate didn't agree with her, and she had a mother and stepfather in California, and of course Alfred Frum and his wife were there, and her sister Margaret and Otto Meyer lived in San Francisco, so we moved there after I graduated from high school.
Great. we're going to have a little bit of an interlude right now because I want Mom to say an old song that I remember as a child that I never actually learned, and I'd like to, Hoppe Hoppe Rider. Okay.
And here's the German. And you have to imagine a small child sitting on your lap being bounced up and down during this. So it's Hoppe Hoppe Rider, wenn fällt ein Rider, fällt in den Graben, fressen ihn die Raben, fällt in den Sumpf, macht der Rider plumps. And the child goes and
squeals with glee.
And it is like a Grimm's fairy tale. It is not a very pleasant nursery rhyme. I think the translation essentially talks about the horseback rider falling into a grave, the Graben. No?
In a ditch.
In a ditch. Okay. Oh, it's a ditch. All right.
Okay.
And I don't know what Zumpf is. Sounds like a dump.
It would be a pit.
A pit, yes. Yeah. In any case, it's not terribly pleasant. The Hoppe Hoppe doesn't mean anything.
It's
That's
just
a sound.
Yeah.
And the rider, I guess, is the horseback rider.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is a lot of fun. I can still remember being a little kid. Speaking of being a little kid, were you raised by your parents, or was it more like, the nanny situation? Did you have a governess or somebody?
We had many. Is it on? We had many servants, but I had a very caring childhood. My mother was I considered a very good mother, very loving mother. She herself felt that she wasn't loved enough as a child, and I think she tried to make up for it in spades. My brother has totally different recollections of his childhood from beginning to end, very much end, but I felt very much loved and cared for. It was very much my mother's doing because my father was away on business a lot.
He visited, he was Germany. A wine merchant, right? He went.
Yes, and he always, as far as my memories of him, he was always in the wine business. I think he did something else earlier, and I can't remember what it is, but consult Peter's memoirs for that. But mostly he was in the wine business almost all his adult life. He traveled a great deal. He traveled to Belgium, which is why my father did not wish to emigrate to America initially, because he said to himself, how am I going to support a family when I don't speak the language? And I speak French, so it was my mother's doing that we survived the Holocaust, because she did not want to stay in Europe, and she just realized that it was unsafe.
Wow. And my understanding from what you've said is that you guys got out, you and Peter got out as students, and your dad could travel as a wine merchant.
That's right.
But it was trickier for your mom. How did your mom get out, and how did the family reunite? Do you know?
I think we may have I'm not positive about this, but I think we perhaps could have gotten out earlier had my parents been willing to relinquish all their belongings earlier. I think they were trying to salvage something. I do know that a van was packed with our belongings and shipped to Rotterdam, but it never reached us. I'm sure it was confiscated en route. But I think the reason my mother was in Germany was she was trying to negotiate a way to get out of Germany without losing everything. That's not, as I said, that may not be accurate. My memory of that is all hearsay, so I don't know. That's my
But once you got to Rotterdam, it was still a whole year because you were waiting.
Yes, and I have no idea where we lived or who supported us or what the situation was there. And having read my brother's memoir, I don't remember his saying where we lived or how we lived or what we did. But I think he went to school there and I didn't.
Oh, interesting. Okay, great. Anything else that you remember from Germany before we move to these States? We actually jump all the way over to San Francisco, I think.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and now here's Dad's recollections of his youth in Germany.
Well, the first thing that happened to me that I don't remember is that I was born in 1929 in the apartment in which we had. It was not really an apartment, it was a flat, a large flat with large rooms that accommodated huge pieces of furniture. Now, we lived on a well, let me say a few things about Karlsruhe. Karlsruhe was founded in 1715. I mention that because for Europe, that's an extremely modern city. And as such, it was laid out in beautiful fashion. It had a castle, and from the castle there were spokes, as the castle would be the center of the wheel, and there were spokes that radiated from the castle, which was surrounded by a beautiful park. And that was the main center of the town. We lived west of the castle, and perhaps, I would say, 1.5 to 2 miles from the center of the city, on a circular, semicircular area which had a park and a pond and some lions surrounding the fountain. And there were we lived on Beethovenstrasse. The area was a semicircular park with 3 streets radiating from it. Mozartstrasse, Beethovenstrasse was the center one, facing south. The one on the left would have been Mozartstrasse, and the one to the right would have been Weberstrasse. And those were the 3 streets of the Heidenplatz. We lived on the bottom large flat in a stone building which had 8 such flats. It had 4 stories, and the stories went from one street to the next, so that our flat was next to Beethovenstrasse. The one on the same floor in the same building would have been on Weberstrasse. And it was a beautiful apartment. And my first memory there was age 3. I had a birthday, and I got a little ship model, a metal ship model, with a propeller which you wound up through the smokestack. And as I ran in, I tripped and dropped the ship model and got a dent in it. And I remember having that ship model for a very long time, and I remember the dent. I don't remember very much between then as specific episodes till age 6, but I remember 3 episodes that I can remember of age 6. One was when I went to school on the first day. The schoolmaster called me up and asked me to read, and I didn't know how to read. So he took a cane and asked me to put my palms up, and he struck me on the fingers. It didn't hurt very much, and it didn't really cause any trauma that I can think of, but I remember it. And later on, that teacher was transferred. It turned out he was an 8th grade teacher and shouldn't have been there. But in any case, I do remember that. A second episode that I remember much more pleasantly was on or near my birthday. No, it wasn't on my birthday. It must have been within a week or so. drove in a convertible car that my father owned but was chauffeur driven. It was a Steyr, S-T-E-I-E-R. And there was a chauffeur, and we drove to Heidelberg. And at Heidelberg, there were, it was overlooking the Rhine on a hill. And I remember climbing on a stone wall, and the first time I got a Coca-Cola bottle.
Oh my.
That was in 1935. The other episode that I remember at age 6, which was my birthday, was in Karlsruhe. There was a Stadtgarten with a zoo, but it also had a lake, and the lake had rowboats. And up until age 3, I always had to be with somebody. Up until age 6, I always had to be with somebody. But on age 6, I was allowed to take out my own rowboat. It was rowboat number 2, which was the most shaky of the rowboats, which I knew. And I got to row by myself, alone in the rowboat. Of course, those days I didn't know how to swim.
You probably didn't have life jackets.
No life.
What were they thinking?
No life rafts or no safety belts. But I had a great time.
Is that also when you took the streetcar by yourself?
That's right.
The same day?
Same day. Actually, there must have been somebody else with me, because somebody else went with me to the park. But on the way to the park, the streetcar that I took was the streetcar number 1, which went from near the Rhine, and I should have mentioned the Heidenplatz would be on the east side of the Rhine, about, I would say, maybe not more than 4 or 5 miles. And so walking to the streetcar, which was on Kaiserstrasse, the number 1, which went actually past the city center, and then took us to the Stadtgarten, or city park, and there was a rowboat. But on the way, I told the conductor proudly, I am 6 years old. And he said, well, then you will have to pay. Up until age 6, you rode the streetcar free. So I had to pay. I still, I think, have a ticket book of streetcar tickets on the number 1.
How funny.
In my collection. But I remember that very well. That was age 6. We went to public school first for my first, it would have been 35, 36. From 35 to 36, I went to a public school. From 36 to 37, and 37 to 78, went to a Jewish school because we could no longer attend public school. And our school let out probably a little later than did the public schools, because we were typically greeted by some Hitler Youth kids as we left the school. And as boys would, we would have some fights and threw some rocks. And one of these hit my brother on the head, didn't hurt him very much. But I remember he and I chased the kid, and we captured him, and we took him home and sat him on the commode a dresser, not a toilet. And I remember that he was panicked because there was a Hitler Youth meeting at 4 o'clock, and we kept him so he would be late to the meeting, and we felt pretty good about that. We weren't really terribly troubled by being met by these kids because we gave as well as they did, and we just had some fights. It was like boys fighting. There was nothing else. We were told, though, that when we walked to and from school, if we saw any marching or we heard any music, we should go and go into a hidden doorway so that we wouldn't have to salute, because if we didn't, we knew it. I was old enough to know that we were not to say Heil Hitler, but if we didn't say Heil Hitler and were just standing there, we were told bad things could happen.
May I interrupt?
Nothing ever
Absolutely.
did.
Well, that reminds me of something also. I was very sheltered from all the Nazi goings on because I was pretty young, but I do remember one episode of a march in our town of Bingen, and it was a military style march, and that I remember that my parents were cowering, and that is definitely the word, behind our draperies as this was going on. I had no idea what it meant at the time, but obviously it was a manifestation of Hitler-type power, and very, very frightening. And in my earlier recollection, I did mention that I was born in Bingen, in the house that I described, remembering as a small child, which was surrounded by beautiful vineyards, which I paid no attention to when I was a small child, but Ernie and I visited many years later, and I was impressed with the beauty of the surrounding area, and it was not bombed during the war, I think because it had no industrial significance. But we too lived in a very spacious apartment with many rooms, perhaps 14 of them. I don't know if we had live-in servants, but my mother had a cook and a laundress, and you needed many servants to, if you were middle-class people.
Because there were no labor-saving devices in those
None
days.
whatsoever. I was told that diapers were boiled on the stove to sterilize them. There certainly were no washing machines, etc. And baby food was made from regular food. There weren't even blenders. I don't know. They mashed everything up with forks, I suppose. And everything was very labor intensive, but it was a much easier life if you were middle class than if you were poor. And we did have money. And I was also told that my father had lost not fortunes, but three very good incomes in his life. The first was when he had invested in a brother's business and went bankrupt. Another was during the inflation in Germany, probably in the 20s.
Sure.
And then the final one, of course, was when we left Germany and everything was confiscated. And I was so proud of my father because he was not an educated man, but a very hardworking one. And he managed to live a middle-class life by dint of hard work and motivation and love for his family. I didn't appreciate it when I was growing up, but certainly in retrospect, he deserves a lot of credit.
Neat. Well, I guess that brings into a good question for both of you, which is, what do you?
I'd like to say just
okay,
a
keep
couple
going.
more
Yeah.
things about my youth in Karlsruhe. I don't know when we no longer could participate in the general activities, but I know that there was a Jewish gymnasium where we could exercise and do gymnastics. And I knew we could play soccer which was my favorite sport when I was
I didn't know
5,
that.
6, or 7, and also gymnastics. And I remember in the gymnasium, instead of having ropes that you climb up, you had a basically a high pole that goes from floor to ceiling, which you climbed up like a rope. But I remember once that somebody shook the bottom of it, and I let go, so I fell down, and I must have hit the base of my ribs, because I still have a little deformity there from that time. But in addition to gymnastics and soccer, which we could do, my father and at that time my mother took me skiing when I was 5. So I started skiing at 5, and I remember that the place was called the Bula Hole, which is the high of the whatever Bula was. And what we had to do was strap seal skins on the bottom of the skis and climb up a herringbone to the top of the hill, and then you take the seal skins off and you slide down and you ski down. The first picture of it that I remember is a picture my father took on camera, on a movie camera, with me skiing through the legs of my father.
Well, we also have a picture of ski jouring, right?
Pardon me?
We also have a picture of ski jouring. Am I pronouncing
my
that
father did. I never did that.
Okay.
And that was a horse drawing a skier. The horse gallops, and the skier holds on behind on a flat.
It's sort of like on snow, a version of water skiing.
That's exactly it. So I did ski quite often, and
so would it take? How long would it take to get all the way up? Was it like all day to climb and then one ski down?
It would. I would say it would take a half an hour up and a minute down.
You really appreciate ski lifts.
But there were, of course, no rope tows. There were no chair lifts or any of that sort. And the skis were much taller than I was. And the way it was measured, they were wooden, and we had to wax them, and you put your hand as high as you could, put your palm down, and that's how the skis were. And the poles were bigger as well. And we did have poles at the time. And the ski boots, of course, were leather.
With grommets.
And they were strapped on to the ski boot with leather. So, and we brought those skis over with us from Germany.
Well, the interesting thing is that much later, in California, when we were both adults, we are almost adults, we were college age, we used seal skins to go from the Cal Lodge to Norden Ski Lift, which had a rope tow, but we had to hike there, and it must have been a little bit of uphill, and it took a good half hour to get there. And since I wasn't accustomed to exercise in those days, I was plenty worn out by the time I got there. And then we rode the rope tow. But I remember my first years of skiing, how difficult they were.
Because of those really long skis?
The skis were too long. They still were too long. We still did this standing up and putting our arms up and to measure the length of the skis, and they didn't have edges, and they were wooden, and they were awful. And lace-up boots, which were never tight enough. Terrible equipment, and cable bindings, which were guaranteed to break your leg if you fell. It was a difficult sport when we were young, and it's amazing
guys persisted.
That Ernie describes it from his childhood, and that not much changed in in those 15 years, or I guess it was only about 15 years from the time he was a small child.
Well, the big thing, I guess, was that they invented lifts. They lift the toes and things
but the
like that
sealskin stayed on.
for a while.
And Ernie might want to talk about his father's first trip up Squaw Valley.
Well, jumping ahead.
It's fine. This is skiing.
An episode. My father was a good skier, liked to ski, and my father in 1938 was exactly 50 years old, and we, I think, within a year, we went up to the Sugar Bowl, which was not quite at Lake Tahoe, but pretty close. It's probably, it's a good 100-mile trip, possibly longer from San Francisco. It's more than 100 miles. But the Sugar Bowl, which Eve and Pete and I went to much later, they had just built the first chairlift. And my father was one of the first to go on it that season. It was a single chair, and I remember it cost $3.
It's a lot of money.
Now that was a lot of money, because the rope tow, which also existed, was 50 cents. And then they had pommel lifts that you put the pole between you, and that was $1. So we had those kinds of conveniences.
This is what year?
Pardon?
When was this? What year was this?
This would be, I went with my father probably the first time in 1939. Okay. So I would have been 10.
Okay.
But jumping ahead a little bit, certainly I remember that after after probably age 12, every Christmas vacation, I would go skiing, first at the Sierra Club Lodge, which was right across from the University of California Lodge. But the way to get there was to hitchhike. And it usually took no more than 3 rides from about 2 blocks. The main street was California Street in San Francisco, where you could pick up a ride with your skis and a ski bag.
Wow.
And those days, there was no problem picking up a ride. I would probably get a ride down to downtown San Francisco, somebody across the bridge, which had been built, somebody from Berkeley then, to take the rest of the way, another 100 miles, up to the Sierra Club. And I did that every year till I went to Cal at age 17 and a half.
So you were doing this while you were at Cal, or you did this before you went?
No, this was before
this was high school?
Cal. And then in high school, instead of going to the Sierra Club, went to the Cal Ski Lodge. I don't remember how much it cost.
I do.
How much was it?
It was $2. It included lodging, all the cold showers you wish to take, 3 meals a day. The meals were pretty basic. Maybe oatmeal in the morning, sandwiches you made yourself on white bread, which included probably American cheese and bologna, something like that, about as cheap a food as you could find. I have no idea what dinner was, but obviously also something very economical. And we continued to go there to save money until shortly after we were married. We decided, since these were segregated dorms, that we preferred a motel where we could share a room. We decided to heck with the economy part of it, and we gave up staying at the Cal Lodge. But it was pretty primitive.
That's pretty funny.
Well, there was a couple of things I remember. The Cal Lodge, before I met Eve, excuse me, and I thought it cost $2.75. But that included all the food. But it was, of course, co-op. You all had duties.
Sure.
Some people
Yeah, KP.
made food, some cleaned the dormitory, some cleaned the toilets, some did the dishes. But that was just fine. But in the evening, after dinner, there was a fireplace, and there was folk dancing. And I remember folk dancing there, and I had sprained at one of these, maybe when I was 18 or 19, I sprained one of my ankles skiing, and I couldn't folk dance because it was awkward. But then it was a Saturday, as I recall, and on Monday I strained the other one. And so then it got equal. And then I could folk dance by really tightening the boots. So that was
You folk dance with your ski boots
well,
on?
I forgot what it was, but I had no trouble going upstairs, but downstairs was a real problem. But what I remember of folk dance, I remember that. I don't know whether I folk danced in ski boots. I do remember, though, folk dancing with this lovely young woman. And I asked her if she wanted to sit with me and have some hot brew of some kind. I don't think we had liquor at the time. And she says, no, my husband was waiting for me. And that was the first time I learned that people wore wedding rings, so that I never bothered to look. But I remember very well that I liked her, and
Lucky for me.
no, she was probably a year or 2 or 3 years older.
Ah, the older woman.
Maybe even older. But
was it Jewish folk dancing or was it general folk dancing?
Pardon me?
Was this a Jewish lodge or a general lodge? So it wasn't Israeli folk dancing. It was
this was in San Francisco.
Okay, yeah. So this was just a regular
Sierra Club. My sister belonged to first, and through her, I got to stay at the Sierra Club. I was probably, I don't know whether I was as young as 12, but probably maybe 12, 13, or 14, because she was at university. She's 7 years older. And but I remember that.
Was it Sierra Club or Cal Club?
Sierra Club.
Sierra Club first.
Oh, okay.
And then when I went to Cal, then I went to the Cal Club. But I do remember one very interesting episode, which my sister and I went skiing at Squaw Valley. I was probably, she would have been, say, 25 maybe, and I was 18. But she did the driving, and we drove up, and then we stayed long, and then we got snowed in. So we got to Truckee, and I went in, and we couldn't drive over Donner Pass. So I had to get a room. So I said, I went in very naively to the bar, because the motel was in the back of the bar, and I said, I need a room, and it'll be me and my sister. And they looked at me and says, yeah, we know.
But Edith got a real kick out of that.
So we slept there overnight, and then the next day we could drive back.
Drive through.
I want to digress for a moment. I remember Ernie telling me that his father skied long before they had ski lifts. Did they not have ski lifts in Germany?
No.
They didn't have them there either. Consequently, I know that he climbed mountains, probably on sealskins, probably herringboning. And my reaction was, well, he must have been one hell of a mountain climber. But I don't know how he could have been a very good skier, since he maybe had one run a day.
Yeah.
And I thought it was Squaw Valley that was that he went on the first time they had this chairlift. Is that not true, Ernie? It was
No,
Sugar
it
Bowl?
was Sugar Bowl.
It was Sugar Bowl. My recollection was wrong.
But there was a one place when the Feldberg. Now that I came back, I hadn't thought of that word in 70 years maybe. The Feldberg was a little farther away than Bülahöhe, where we usually went. And at the Feldberg, I remember we climbed all day.
Oh my!
To get to the top for one run.
Wow.
And the run may have been 8, 10, 15, 20 minutes, I remember. But I remember all day, in fact, stopping to eat lunch and continuing the climb and then having one run down.
Now, did your mom do this with you, or was it just your dad and the kids?
When we got a little older, Mother decided she didn't need to come along. She was not as good a skier as my father, and she, I think, went along because it was a family thing. When I went, Harold went, and so did Edith. So it was a family trip, but I know I started at age 5. I think we started you at age 5?
No.
Pretty early, because Mom really wanted us going skiing.
We started you at 7. We started Lori at 6, and we started Renee at 5 because we wanted the whole family to ski. And we started, the year we started you, Carol, there was a drought at Sandia Peak in Albuquerque. And so we started you at Purgatory. I remember what it cost there as well.
What did it cost?
It was $3 or $3.50 for the chairlift. They had only one, but it serviced quite a large terrain. They had a rope tow, which was $1, and children under 12 were free, so you were free.
Okay.
And
did they have a Palma too? One of them had a Palma, because I remember riding a Palma, but it might have been Sandia.
yeah, I don't think Purgatory had a Palma.
I remember how tricky those rope tows were. I still remember falling off that lift, and I remember, yeah.
I fell off the first lift I think I ever rode. I started skiing in college because your father was a skier and I wanted to be one as well, and had these long, horrible skis. Fell off a rope tow, broke the ski.
Oh wow!
Right then and there.
Because you, I guess, banged. You must have.
I have no idea what the circumstances were. It was the end of that. I've had not too many skis in my life, but that pair didn't last very long.
Well,
there was one episode that I remember skiing though. All 3 of the girls wore the same sweater.
We have some video of that.
Red, white, and blue.
Yeah, red, white, and blue. Peter gave them to us. They were Hanukkah presents.
I skied without poles because I had my 8mm camera, and I tried to catch all of you turning. And we do have
video of that. In fact, we'll probably be converting that. I also remember at least one other occasion when you were skiing with the video camera that wasn't such a good idea. You got injured one day because you were trying to videotape us. Hurt a shoulder or something.
Long video.
Not video, it was 8mm films.
Well, I
filming.
got hurt, I don't think then. I got hurt once when we were at Purgatory.
That's right. And you were looking back for Lori.
I was looking back for Lori,
okay.
And I tripped. She was 12.
Okay.
And then I dislocated my shoulder.
I remember that.
That's much later. And it was in fact the winter before we moved to Bethesda. And it was she was 12, I remember.
Yes,
and
that's correct.
I remember they took me down on this toboggan.
Yeah, well, I vividly remember that.
And I tell you, that was a very painful thing.
Oh, bad. Bump, 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 bump,
and
bump.
And the ride to the hospital was painful also.
Yeah, and then they told me we can do 2 things. We can cast it and it'll freeze, or we can not cast it and it won't heal. So all I did though was I got some shoelaces and I kept my arm in it, and it healed perfectly well and I have no disability from that at all. And it was dislocated, but the fractured pieces were not separated from it. So the fracture, when it was reduced or put back in the socket, the pressure was such that the 3 cracks healed.
Oh, that's good.
So, but I remember later on that year we went to
Sandia.
Was that the year of the lift?
This was when
I don't know if it was the same year, but I remember that very distinctly, and so do you.
It was also when Harold got married for the second time.
I know when it was because I remember the ages of our children at the time. You were 12, and it was at Sandia.
And
so it was not the same year. It must have been earlier because Lori
broke the arm. Lori was 12.
That's
no,
right.
we're thinking of
So
the
this was
Sandia when the lift broke in Sandia.
Yeah.
And I was riding with a stranger
You
because
were-
we were 5 people, and it was a 2-person lift, and one of you was with
I was with Lori.
yes, and I was with Renee, who was about 7.
so I would have been 12, yeah.
Yes, and the brakes broke on the lift. It was one of the worst.
It stopped, yeah, and then it went backwards.
Went
Right.
backwards as faster and faster because of the weight of all the people. And the family, except for Carol, were able to unload at midpoint as we passed it. The ski patrol was out in force, very effective, and screamed at people to throw themselves off the lift and scramble out of the way, and none of us were hurt. Carol was way up ahead of us, stranded 200, you may want to speak to this.
It's okay.
You were
About
above
200
Yeah, up a canyon.
About a 200-foot canyon.
Yeah.
Took many hours to evacuate you.
Yeah. They sent up a
Pulley.
pulley with this sort of, looked like a giant pair of shorts.
And it had holes in it.
With holes in it. We put them on our legs. And
Yes.
then they lowered us down to the ground. We threw our skis down that 200 feet or whatever.
With Lori, I was sitting there, and we were going back, getting toward the midpoint, and I was on the right side, and she was on my left. So she had to get off first. So I said, "Get off as far as you can, so I won't end up on top of you." And we all waited there till you got down.
Well, actually, Ernie and I started climbing up to see if you rescued, but we never made it because you were way ahead of us.
high.
But I do remember, and I don't know if you remember this, Carol, we asked you when you were finally down, were you frightened? And your answer was, no, it was really very exciting, and now I have something to tell my grandchildren. You actually said that at age 12. And at about age 28 or 29, when you had not yet produced your first child, I did remind you that you had to have a child first before you had could have a grandchild to tell a story to.
That's wonderful. Okay.
Well, it was,
This is how
as I
my parents
recall,
met.
early June 1949, and Vera Livingston, who was the sister of Doris Livingston, and Doris Livingston was going to be married to my brother later on that year. So but Vera's best friend was Ursula Meyer, a cousin of Eve. And Vera related to me that a cousin of Ursula from Chicago would be moving out to San Francisco, and that I might like to meet her. And so I don't know how it came about, but you arrived just about the first day I called you, which was July 1. But somehow you'd already had moved into 2076 Quitara Street in San Francisco, and I had your phone number. You had a phone, but you had just gotten there maybe one day before. But it was a Friday night then that I called, and Eve came to the phone, and I called from 119 30th Avenue in a little cubby. It was sort of a booth-like area, coat closet in our house on 119 30th. You know that
Yeah.
little room?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That little telephone room.
Little telephone room. And I phoned and we talked a few minutes, and I asked if you would like to go out with me on July 4th. And Eve said yes. And so and I think Eve will tell her part of this, but in any case, I rang the doorbell, and Peter came to the door. So the first person I met was Peter, and he took me up the stairs, and Eve was there on top of the stairs in a shantung dress. It was it was the bottom half was dark brown, and then it shaded into a middle brown, and then a light brown. Beautiful dress in shantung.
What is shantung?
It's a type of silk.
It's sort of like a Japanese or Chinese look? It sounds like that.
No, it's just the fabric was this type of silk.
And then I met Eve's parents. I went up the stairs, but didn't have much time. We said hello. And
is this the house I knew or a different house?
No, this was a rental house.
It was a rental house on
nearby.
And so Eve went with me, and I had borrowed my father's car, which was a 1947 Pontiac convertible.
A convertible, wow.
And so I picked Eve up, and then we picked up Melford Gartenberg, who lived on California Street. He sat in back, and then we picked up Charlotte Kempner, who was his date, and we drove via the marina to the Sir Francis Drake Hotel and went to the Starlight Room.
Oh, wow.
Where I was 20, she was 17. So I don't remember, I don't think we could order alcoholic drinks, but somehow we could go and sit in this bar-like atmosphere with a table where 4 people could sit, and there was a dance floor, and we danced. And when we sat down, what I remember though, is that Eve took out a cigarette.
Really?
And I just casually mentioned that I asked you if you liked to smoke. And I think you'll tell it from your memory. You said, no, I really don't like to. And I said, well, maybe why smoke? And as I recall, that was the last cigarette Eve ever smoked. And I had never smoked a cigarette. And the follow-up was that this was a Monday night. And it was Friday night, was July 1, Monday was July 4, Independence Day. Mm-hmm. And,
so did you see fireworks?
Pardon me?
Did you see fireworks?
No, didn't see fireworks.
The only fireworks were the ones between you? Sparks?
But I came home, had a wonderful time, and I made a date with Eve, I think the next day for the following Sunday to go to Stinson Beach. And that was the first time I remembered ever asking a person for a date within a week of having had a date. And I had very few dates.
A slow learner.
I didn't date very much, so we went to Stinson Beach, had a good time. I remember some details which are irrelevant, but I do remember this time I think my brother drove. Oh, I do have to say one other thing about July 4th. It was our first date, and I drove. Eve was in the front, Mel and Charlotte in the back. And it being our first date, it was their last date, unfortunately.
Oh dear.
So they didn't date anymore after that. But on Sunday when we went to Simpson Beach, Eve and I were in the back of the convertible. Harold and Doris were driving. And when I came home, my father was there, and I said, Dad, I kissed Eve. And he looked at me and says, that could become serious.
I guess it did.
It certainly did.
And that summer, though, and then I'll be through, that we saw each other every day, except one Wednesday when I didn't call. I wanted to test the system.
You were a funny guy.
And I was miserable.
Oh.
So.
But you were already committed to go to Pomona at that point, right?
I was, and as far as the smoking was concerned, I smoked in high school, so-called smoked for 3 months, I think, no more, because it was cool, considered cool at that time. But like Bill Clinton, I never learned to inhale, and therefore when Ernie asked me if I enjoyed it, I had to answer honestly no, because there is no pleasure in smoking if you don't inhale, because you
don't get any of the
don't get any of the effects. All you get are the annoying smoke in your eyes, on your clothes.
I was going to say, because
So-
you were such a rabid anti-smoking
yes.
person in our childhood, that it was sort of surprising
well,
to me to hear you ever smoked at all.
Our mother smoked for many years, and my brother and I hated it. Our father smoked small cigars.
I remember that actually,
And
because
they
the
were
smell, it still
Very
brings.
bad. They had a terrible smell, and he even smoked them in the car. And my brother and I both were anti-smokers, but for a brief period, I thought I needed to attract people by smoking, by being cool.
He also
And when
smoked
my-
a pipe, right? Because I
don't remember his ever
Oh,
smoking.
because there's a tobacco smell that every so often, when I get a whiff of it, I remember your dad. I remember
No, they were.
Dad.
I think they were called cigarillos. They were
Okay.
about the size of cigarettes,
Okay.
and really they were nasty things.
I don't get them up close, but once in a great while I smell that, and it does bring
There was,
really a heady memory back.
there was one other episode in that first summer. I was working at the Donner Lab at the University of California, and the way to get there was by streetcar and then by the train that took us across the bridge, and then by bus to get us to Bancroft Street, and from there to the Donner Lab. And then on the way back the same way. But as I got to the train, and I was invited for dinner for the first time at the mayor's. And I recall getting onto the train, just before I got on the train, a bird hit me on top of the head. And here I was in a gabardine suit, which I had brought along, with a tie, of course, and a gabardine suit. Wanted to make a good impression, being invited. And at that time I was about 5'9.5" or 5'10", quite taller than any of the mayors, and Pete wasn't there. So I remember I had this lousy feeling on the top of my head, which I still had hair at the time. And so I rang the doorbell, and they opened the doorbell, and I said hello briefly and went to the bathroom and had to excuse myself, kept myself very tall so that no one could see the top of my head. Went to the bathroom and washed the top of my head up with a towel. I didn't think I had a comb along, but then somehow I made my hair presentable again, and then I came out. But that was a event. You know, I don't know that I saw Eve every day, But I think
You
it
probably
was
talked by
almost
phone or
every
radio.
night that I would come over. My dad would lend me his car, and the car found its way. I didn't have to steer it out.
It knew its way then.
30th to 25th through the Golden Gate Park, up 19th Avenue to Noriega, a left turn up the hill, and there I parked.
So you were in your permanent house pretty quickly.
Yes, I don't remember how long we were in the rental house, which was just a few blocks from Noriega, the house you remember.
It was a very short time.
Was it?
Yeah.
I'd always thought that the bird poop episode had happened on the original Blind Date. So it was the first time you actually came to their house.
It was the first time that I was invited for dinner. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I've been telling it wrong all these years.
What I remember, and I don't know, I don't remember saying it, but I've been told that when I was reluctant to go on the blind date, that I said to my mother something to that effect, and she said, "Oh, go ahead, you don't have to marry the guy."
It turned out she didn't have to.
But she did. That's so funny. And Doris married Harold.
That's right. Well, Doris married Harold first.
Oh, because were they already engaged at this point?
Yes, okay. They were engaged when we first met.
And there was a funny thing about that wedding. I wanted to take Eve to the wedding, and Vera wanted to take her boyfriend Harold Stein to the wedding. And neither one was allowed to go to that wedding. So in spite of that wedding, I married Eve, and Vera married Hal.
Yeah, that's
and we're both still married.
Yes, and the original married pair is not.
And that's correct.
That's right.
Yes, Doris. And
that's life.
That's interesting.
But we dated all that summer, but I was only 17 and a half when I met your father, and went off to college in the fall and dated people there.
And that college you went to was Pomona, which
That's right. For the first 2 years I went there before I transferred to Cal. And I was going to say.
So that first date was 61 and a half years ago.
Wow.
Oh, I do remember what I was going to say, and that is that we called it a summer romance because this continued for the 4 years of my college time.
Oh,
we dated only in the summers because by the time I got to Cal, your father had gone, he went early admission to Harvard before he ever...
Harvard Medical School.
Harvard Medical School, before he ever received his bachelor degree because he had good enough grades to warrant that. And I think they gave you your bachelor's from med school, or never got the bachelor degree?
If I went to the University of California in San Francisco, I would have gotten a bachelor degree. I never did.
So you have an MD but no BA.
That's right.
So what, 3 years? You were 3 years at Cal?
Yes, he was there.
3.5 it turned out. I went to summer school too, because by the time I got accepted, I had taken no biology. That wasn't required for admission, but I knew
when you got accepted to medical school.
Medical school.
How
so
interesting.
I took some courses in the summertime to make up a little bit.
The last summer before you went to Harvard.
Yeah, it turned out it was an advantage not to have had it because the terms were similar in, say, almost every one of my classmates in medical school, and this is a little aside, had cat anatomy. And the terms are quite similar. So in fact, the first day of medical school, and I remember this, I had a bad cold, but nevertheless the smell of the, was it
Formaldehyde?
Was it, what was the preservative?
Wasn't it formaldehyde?
I don't, I just can't now remember, but it penetrated. And our cadavers were face down, so the back showed. And my 3 teammates who came from Haverford College, immediately spouted out. Here was the trapezius muscle, and it had its origin here and its insertion there. And I said to myself, God, it's the first day I'm already hopelessly behind. And I remember one of my classmates, we did go to the yard and had a bone box, and we looked at the bone box. But about 3 weeks later, we turned the cadaver over. And now the cat doesn't have a clavicle. So one of the first muscles we had to learn was the sternocleidomastoid. Well, that was not a mystery to me, but to them, because they had to learn sternocleidomastoid, no cleido. And all the terminology now was different. So they had to unlearn
things,
which was no problem for me.
You didn't have anything to unlearn. How funny. Oh, great.
We wrote, in medical school, we wrote each other quite a bit. Not every day, but probably at least once a week and possibly twice a week. And I signed my letters all my long. But apparently Pete didn't think that was enough. But in any case, in the summer of, one of the summers anyway, I think it was after Eve had been at Pomona. Was it 1 year? The first year, I think I came down there to date you, the first one. But the second winter, well, maybe it was the summer, I got a ride in a car, and no, I'm mistaken. The second one, I took a charter flight to LA, and then I took a bus to Pomona, and then I called Eve at French house, and Eve said, "Where are you?" And I said, "I was home, just about as far from home as you are. I happen to be next door." So I had gone, and she was at French house, and this was actually the day she was going to go home, and we were going to go to San Francisco. So we, I remember the fellow who helped with Eve's luggage to put it in the bus to go to the train station. And we took the train had a name, but it was an overnight flight. And we were wrapped in blankets, and we were sitting next to each other. I loved it. And we rode through an evening train and arrived in San Francisco in the morning, and our folks knew that we were coming. Eve's parents were there, my parents were there. My parents jerked me to their side. Eve was jerked to her parents. So you were taken home to your home, I was taken home to my home. When we got there, we talked by phone again. But I remember the immediate separation that occurred at the train station in San Francisco as we arrived. It was, I think, probably your last time at Pomona, because the following semester, I think you started at Cal.
I don't remember when it was.
Yeah, interesting.
So that was a...
So, when did you decide to get married? How did you decide to get married?
Well, I asked him, of course. That's because all my love in the letters did not convey marital intentions to anybody in my family. And I was about 20, I suppose, and I said to him, and I remember this time and the place, it was in your parents' home, in the front room.
The one that had the piano in it? In the front window?
No, I think it was the one that had that Fritz had his desk in.
Okay.
It was the one facing the back of the house.
Oh,
That's
okay.
right. I said, asked him, I said, are we going to get married? He said, well, of course. It's just he had sort of neglected to formally ask me.
Well, I thought we had decided some time before that Eve should finish college.
Absolutely.
But the year before she did, we got engaged, had a lovely engagement party in Atherton, given by Maud and Jerome Simon in their Atherton home. Maud and Jerome Simon were very important. They lived behind us at 11930th Avenue before they moved to Atherton. And that was the couple that actually greeted us when we moved to San Francisco. They arranged for the a rental house on 283 29th Street as a 29th Avenue, which was we then moved to 30th, one block closer to the ocean. But Maud and Jerome were like, introduced us to everything in San Francisco. They were our closest immediate relatives. Then when they moved to Atherton, we stayed in close contact. And when they heard of our engagement, they wanted very much to give the engagement party.
How were they related to you?
They were related, their name was Simon, but they were Simon on my mother's side.
But they gave
important.
you.
Just my maternal grandmother, brother, was Sid Simon, and his three sons were Jerome, Leo, and Jerome, Leo, I've forgotten the third, but Jerome was closest to us.
And he's the one.
And
So he was your mother's cousin?
He was then my mother's cousin, yeah.
And were they also, well, the Frums were the ones who Frum sponsored you. Were they the ones who sponsored your family? Were they the ones who sponsored your family?
Yes.
To the States?
Yeah. He sponsored us. And then the three brothers and their close relatives and their acquaintances all issued affidavits for what I read in my mother's memoir to 38 people who all got out from Karlsruhe, or relatives, not all from Karlsruhe, but from Germany, because of the affidavits that were issued from the Simon branch of that family.
Wow.